Chapter 35. Extra, extra, Lost and Found. I think he just became a little, overexcited, Dr. Skelton told Rob and Jill. All Jerry's physical measurements checked out aces. Simple hyperventilation, Skelton told them. He is excitable by nature. Dr. Klingendorfer found Jerry to be hypertensive, in fact. Gets himself worked up. He got himself worked up over going back into school, running around the school in his winter coat, he said, and seeing his little friend, the tutor girl. Had a talk with him. He needs to settle down and just relax a little bit more, to ease back into things. That's all. There are no complications. Not with his head injury. He'll be fine. More than anything else, Jerry felt embarrassed. His first thought upon waking back up was, where's Nell? His next thoughts revolved around his likely inability to ever face her again. Nell had rushed out to her waiting mother when Jerry slumped to the floor, and he looked as if he was doing just and only that when he passed out, setting himself down on a soft green patch of earth at the end of a long and exhausting hike. She dashed out to the Volvo, only after first flagging down Mr. Silviano, who was putting the theater back in shape with a broom. It was his first year on the job as gym teacher, and he had volunteered for the task. Nell sent him down the hall to see about Jerry right away. She found Jill parked in back of her mom's car. Nell told her what had happened, and Jill was beside Jerry holding his hands seconds after Mr. Silviano had helped him up, sitting him on the big desk as he quickly cleared his head. "Can I go home, Mom?" he asked. Jill thanked Mr. Silviano, who asked that she call him Carl, for attending to her son. Jerry had thought that he heard his mother's voice shouting out his name as all went from murky to black and empty inside his head, when he'd fainted in what felt like TV slow motion. But it had to have been Nell, if it was anyone he actually heard, because his mom was only just pulling up to the curb in front of the school as he was setting his backside on the cold floor. While lost in his swampy faintness, he never really lost complete consciousness, so he thought. Jerry was sure for a moment that he was moving backwards along the floor, not dropped on his bottom, but flat out on his back, moving like in a boat on a river or in a car on the road. He felt, too, he was positive, both his mother's hands holding his own, tightly. All this for only the moments he was conking out, all before Jill had stepped foot through the school's front door. And those moments, when he was conking out, he could not clock them. To him it felt like the time it took to breathe in and out, and it felt like all the breaths he had ever taken. The impressions passed as he opened his eyes to drink in Mr. Silviano's comforting face. Jill told Rob that night, once both had decided to not deter Jerry from re-entering school on Monday, that she was aware of what may have caused Jerry to have had his episode that afternoon with Nell. It was, of course, Nell. Rob said, "Never thought of that girl as much of a knockout, but everybody knows where beauty lies, don't they? Maybe she gave him a kiss." He laughed lightly, adding, "Suppose that's why they call it falling in love. But I can't really remember doing anything like that." Jill answered, and both went to sleep. When Jerry arrived at school on Monday, caught in the currents of the busy hallways, he was most acutely aware of one thing. It was that he would be swiftly flowing in some other direction should the current carrying Nell come his way. "Can't see her again," he blankly told himself, expecting her to be around every corner. And he found her as soon as he got to his seat. She was sealed in an envelope, crisp and white and waiting for him at 8:30 a.m. on top of a pile of other papers for his attention, propped on his homeroom desk. The scrawly rendition in black pen of his full name on the face of the envelope had given Jerry no indication of who had addressed it to him. But when he tore it open, a chime of recognition clanged louder than life. "Jerry, I hope you're feeling better. Sorry I could not tutor you more in Shakespeare. Hope at least now you know what star-crossed means. And thank you very much. I love the picture." Her name below the message was scratched out. She continued, "I am so busy it seems like every time I talk to you I'm forgetting something. Almost did it again. So, here goes. This is very important. As soon as you are out of homeroom, on Monday, your first day back, hope you get this, go see Charles in the library. He'll be there. Make sure you go see him. I need to let you know that there's something that you have to know. Thanks for the picture and thanks for asking me. They were both nice things for you to do, Jerry. You are right. It's no good wanting something. You have to take it, or at least try. And that's what I did too, with the show on Sunday. My leg still hurts a lot, but it was the only way I got through, by taking it, just like you. Nell." This threw Jerry right over the desk. He'd heard all the coaches he'd ever had say, "If you want something, you gotta work for it," or "Don't just want it, go and get it." But Nell's "take it" was something else. The words reached up with invisible hands and choked him breathless. He paused, wondering, does she mean like grabbing for what you need, or putting up with how much it hurts to get it? He decided they were both the same thing. Nell finished with, "P.S. I waited down the hall to make sure you were okay before I left." She must have gone back and gotten the picture, Jerry thought, surprised, raising his head to look blankly around the room. "I completely forgot about the picture on the floor. She dropped it. I remember now. Must have walked by it when I left with Mom." He resumed rereading the note. "Something I have to know?" He stared at the name at the bottom of the message, then pored over every line of the note, as if he were savoring the aroma of a freshly baked cake, before eating all of it. Her handwriting was light, like inscribed with a plume. It was jarring, however, how the delicate application of the pale ink contrasted with the sharp edges of the characters. It gave him pause. Her name looked like it was written with 2 gashes instead of with 2 L's. Her N was shaped like a little weapon. Nell. It was a taunt. A warning? But only to look at, not in what she had written. Not in what he felt. He took one last look at the note. Something she needs to let me know. He sighed silently. Someplace in his head he edited the line in Nell's note to read something I need to tell you, rather than what it said. He knew this to be true. And the wanting it and taking it? He knew he wanted Nell. Was this her way of saying maybe she'd changed her mind and that she was there for the taking? Specifically taking to the ball? After all? Jerry straightened up in his seat, bursting from the place he sat, as he neatly folded Nell's note back along the same lines where she had creased the paper in the first place. It was as far from a love letter as heaven's rooftop was from the muddy earth, but Jerry was warmed by it, tickled that despite the aggressive penmanship, she had used the magic word, in words addressed to him, for the first time ever, Love. The jagged, though softly sketched letters stuck in his head after the bell-ending homeroom, as he very nearly skipped down 6 hallways and 4 flights of stairs, out across the wide courtyard at the center of the school. From Nell's fingers to her pen onto the clean page, for Jerry's eyes to alone see. Love. It lit up his mind. even if what Nell loved was the picture that the camera had produced, and certainly not him. Charles dropped his Hockey Weekly newspaper onto the table. "Oh, Jerry, you got the note," Charles said. "Good. I've got to—" But Jerry cut him off, breathless and bubbling. I know. She said, she told me in the message, she said to see you. Nell told me you had to tell me something really, really important." The boys shuffled at the front desk, and the librarian, a tall, slight 40-ish blonde-haired man with a flimsy mustache of light gold and bangs that masked a receding hairline, blew them away with a booming, haughty shush. Hands on hips, the librarian, Denny, told them, "Go to the courtyard if you need to be so effervescent, you two. This happens to be the domain of courteous silence you're standing in." He posed with his hands still propped on each hip, as if waiting for the courteous silence to resume. And it did. Charles took hold of Jerry's arm and led him away from Denny's silent domain. Jerry wanted to laugh at Denny. He wanted to giggle out loud at the librarian and, with rising elation, at what he knew must be awaiting him. "Where's Charles taking me?" he thought, but did not ask, figuring that he did not need to do so. Why spoil the surprise? Once they reached the set destination, the boys standing in the quietest part of the multi-winged library, indeed a domain of silence, a place where there were no books on shelves, Jerry could no longer contain himself. This was the spot, he thought. No one around to bug us. How cozy. Nothing to read in here anyway. Is she here?" he asked Charles, who, having just stopped dragging Jerry to the place, turned to face his friend. They were in the midst of the microfilm viewing room, with its dozen bucket-seat screening stations, looking like command posts on a spaceship setting course for the outer planets beyond Riverview High. A spool and wheel mechanism just larger than the size of a pair of pucks hatched out from the base of the screens. One screen glowed expectantly in the faint light of the multi-screen chamber. Jerry could not tell whether someone was sitting there or not. "She?" Charles answered Jerry after a long delay, seeming like he was waking from a dull dream. "Is who here?" "Nell. Nell told me to come see you right away, right after homeroom," Jerry went on in a high whisper, excited, beaming, shifting in place. "Is she over there?" He pointed at the backlit, back-turned microfilm machine. "Who? What the hell are you talking about, Jerry? Thought you were better. What are they doing letting you back in school?" Charles half-joked, also looking with Jerry at the one curious machine. "He's teasing me," thought Jerry, making his anticipation crackle all the more. "You're talking about Nell?" Charles looked at Jerry, and Jerry looked at him. Jerry saw his best buddy, but only thought of Nell, and how that, he still just knew, she must have changed her mind. Jerry was alight. Every one of his teeth blared at Charles. "So you saw Nell, and she told you to come here?" Charles said. Before Jerry could answer, he added, "I know that. Yeah, I asked her to give you the message." Jerry's expression, a face fit to greet a winning lottery ticket, remained cemented in place. The glee behind it, though, began to all run out. Jerry's eyes said, "Huh? Did you ask her to come here too? She's supposed to be here too? To be here?" Charles said, now looking around the room himself. "I just wanted for her to give you the message. I don't want her or anyone else to come here and see this." Charles was annoyed. Jerry had not often seen him genuinely bothered. "I am telling you, I didn't even want to call you to say it over the phone, Jerry. What I found. That's why I had Kate ask Nell last night, to see if she could tell you or give you a note. She was supposed to give you a note. You know, she's tutoring you and all." She was, Jerry said, his face still fitting the contours of his lost elation, as if his expression was a clay mold. Was tutoring. He broke the mouth part of the mold to add, was, isn't anymore. Well, she was. Okay, doesn't matter. I heard her. She told Kate how she was still leaving your assignments on your desk, or dropping them off for your homeroom teacher or something, going to do that for you, or whatever, for your first day back at school. I don't know. They talked about it. Nell slept over last night, after the play. I didn't go. Way too much homework. Katie was just dressed up as a big dog the whole time anyways. All she did was bark. I know, Jerry limply replied. Well, you don't know this. So, I had Kate tell her to leave you a note telling you to come right over here, said Charles, becoming as agitated as Jerry had been buoyant moments before. Jerry, you've got to see what I found, right in here. Nell's not here. No! Charles checked himself, looking down the length of the hall and short flight of stairs up to the microfilm media research wing of the library. He didn't want any interference from Denny, who might have been a bit on the dandy side, but was not in the least sissy-like when it came to enforcing his rules of silence in what was most certainly his domain. Charles leant back against the nearest microfilm unit and whistled, low, a long, hollow note. When the tone ceased, he said, You know, I've got to show you something that you won't believe. But can I just say something first? Uh-huh. I mean, I'm your friend, aren't I? Your best friend in the school, on the hockey team? I mean, we went to kindergarten together, right? In school together since forever. You are my best friend, Jerry said, coming out of one fog and entering another. Then I've got to ask you, 'cause this is getting pretty far out now. Far out? Jerry said. Yeah, pretty nuts, like, what's up with you and Nellie Belly? It was his big sister's pet nickname for her best friend. Charles thought it an opportune time to let it slip. Jerry took no notice. Charles went on. I mean, you've never had a girlfriend at all. Not even a normal one, like one in your own grade, you know? Man, can't you add? She's so much older than you, Jerry. It's like ridiculous. She drives. She's going to college. You and me, we're still, like, we only just started high school this year, right? Charles fiddled with the whirling machinery of the microfilm player, twirling the empty wheel twice, then said, I know, so what? So are Raquel Welch and Anne Margaret a lot older than us, too, and who would say that about them, you know? Anne Margaret, you got in to see carnal knowledge. Huh? Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, Katie's a real good sister, even if she does hide my record sometimes. Yeah, Jerry sighed. Yeah, but... Hell Bell? Charles gave the little wheel one hard spin that made it buzz as it went around. Jerry winced himself fully back into the moment. Tommy says she's like a cheerleader, said Charles, but with a brain. A brain outweighed by her talent and nerve, it turned out. Nell never made it to New Haven in the fall. Seeing Cabaret that year turned her head from the ivy to Hollywood's tinsel trail instead, where she chased all of the divine decadence that the tail end of the screen hoofing trade had to offer, until rebounding to make Broadway's footlights her lasting home. I know, she's something else, Jerry said, finished wincing but not drawn to Charles's horrified grimace, and falling for Nell all the more. Yeah, something. I'll show you something, Charles said, putting a full stop to the subject of Nell, and stepping towards the lit machine where she would not be found. Jerry found himself following Charles. Stunned from the unplanned epilogue to the story of Nell, he plopped down into the empty seat. Jerry's spirit smoldered in the ashen light of the microfilm screen. Faint though it was, it flushed Nell from his system like it was a celestial high beam blazing straight from the center of the sun. It was a page in microfilm, the front page of the sports section of the Riverview Echo. The year 1941. The issue of February 28th. Headline: Harman's Horror. Spread in 90-point type at the top of the page. It rode like a commanding knight over the top of a picture, demanding that the reader take a closer look. Jerry looked close as he could, jutting forward as if he were about to smash his face right through the screen. The picture was surprisingly clear, clean, and revealing for its time. Jerry was not concerned with its technical brilliance. He was smacked with its subject matter. It was a fast-frozen action shot of his father. Jerry's father, Rob, sprawled out, alone, in front of an empty goal cage. His legs higher than his head, his back flat to the ice, Rob's arms and stick waved over his chest like he was drowning in an ice-crusted lake. Rob's face was in perfect focus, its expression one of perfect alarm. His head turned to the camera, inadvertently. He had only intended to face the puck sliding towards him. Rob's left ear must have been freezing it, if he could feel it at all, pressed out of sight, flat onto the surface of the ice. Jerry gawked at the screen, entering another world, one he had never seen, never known to be, and never imagined. He gasped without hearing a sound. Rob did feel the cold, disintegrated shards of rough ice, and they burnt his ear. His eyes felt the quick blackout poke of the newspaper photographer's flashbulb. White light turned his vision black. At the same time, the photographer he could not see snatched a moment of sight for all to behold forever after. The bulky guy with the bulky camera standing out in his shabby, smudged gray hat was pressed to the outside of the boards by the crowd. The top of the boards cut into his blubbery middle. Leaning over the boards with his camera high, he had trouble breathing against the crush of the spectators, a crowd 4 deep that pressed back into the wall only 2.5 yards behind him. Riverview Rink was host to 2,000 plus, packed in like bodies jammed onto the deck of the Titanic. They screamed as the flashbulbs burst to catch the climax on ice in double overtime of the high school state championship hockey match between Riverview High's Beavers and the visiting Waltham Rovers. The camera recorded the time and place where Rob Lake, 17 years old and a first-season varsity senior, spent the final seconds of his short career. He spent them lying flat on his back on the ice. The game was tied 2-2 going into overtime. The teams were evenly matched except for the Riverview goalie, who was touted as being the best in the state, and the best in the last 20 years. That the Beavers benefited from the net-minding talents of Squirmin' Herman, nicknamed by the local press for his effective but floppy style in net, alone made them the heavy favorites in the one-game elimination or elation final. Herman Harman had made 19 saves in regulation time, another 9 in the first overtime, and had stopped 7 shots already early in the second OT. He was resting, leaning on his stick in the crease, before a face-off when the coach sent out the new kid, a defenseman. A fresh one, a kid who played infrequently, only making the team as a senior last fall. A not tall but stringy kid who looked inches taller than he actually was. Not bad on his skates, competent with the puck in his own end when Harman wasn't shouting at him. It was Rob Lake. It would be his first shift of the game. Riverview had 4 defensemen, and one went out with a game-ending injury in the third period. The other 3, and a converted forward who was better off playing forward, with no nose for defense, had been played to exhaustion. The 2 best defensemen were beginning to stumble and making mistakes. So, with 3 minutes played in the second overtime, and Herman having made a diving save on a breakaway caused by one of those mistakes, the Beavers coach tapped Rob Lake on the shoulder and told him, "Make it or break it, bub." Herman was dumbfounded when he saw Rob glide down into the zone. "Where's Murray?" he demanded of Ollie, Rob's defense mate to his right. What's going on? Doesn't he know it's overtime? Herman, no longer leaning on his stick, glowered at Rob, a player he had never spoken to, not once all season, except to chide him for crossing in front of his net with the puck in scrimmages. Herman even whacked Rob across the back of the skates, hard, the last time he committed the grave effrontery, in practice the day before. "Go back to the bench! Tell Murray to get his ass out here now!" Herman squawked at Rob, having a voice like an excited raven in his teens. He was senior team captain after all, and had some say in things. But not this say. The coach held up his hand in the stop signal like a cop at a buzzing intersection when Rob did try to get off the ice. He returned to his spot on left defense, on the edge of the face-off circle, right in front of Herman. "Murray's beat. Coach said he needs a little rest," Rob told the goalie. Herman pulled a face like he'd swallowed a live crab. His eyes burned as two butane flames. The referee, correct and efficient, mindful at such a crucial juncture of the title game, asked both sides ceremoniously, and in an unnervingly theatrical voice, if all were ready to meet your fates. "I'm ready," Herman cawed. "Lack," which he pronounced lack. "Clear it out. Clear it right down. Don't wait. Ice it. I don't care, but just clear it." Herman hunched into his position, still looking like he had eaten something that clawed at his guts. The ref dropped the puck. It bounced once as Riverview's tiny, quick, and earnest French-Canadian-born centerman Guy Cloutier fanned on the puck off the face-off. His opponent caught it on the bounce and rapped the puck in behind Harman's net, where it sat, requiring Rob's urgent attention. "I'll get it! Get out!" Herman shouted in Rob's ear as he passed the cage in pursuit of the play. Herman cut in front of him, his defenseman Rob, almost knocking him down. Flinging his stick in one hand, like a scythe cutting corn, and hanging on to his fixed iron cage with his small glove, Herman sent the puck careening along the uneven corner and on up the boards. It never left the zone. At the left point, the Rovers' defenseman scooped the wild rubber, lifting it right back to the net in a single lunging swipe of his stick. The crowd crested on a wave of screams and sighs as Herman threw up both of his tan leather-clad hands, batting the shot down in front of him. Herman hit the ice along with the puck. Rob stood over him, jostling with a Rovers forward twice as wide and 2 inches higher than himself. Rob struggled to elbow the player off the rebound. Both grunted, and Rob heard Harman holler up at him to get out! He wasn't telling Rob to get the puck out of the zone or to get it out of harm's way, as he had commanded Rob to do earlier, as he frequently ordered in scrimmages when they were on the same side. Rob knew the distinction. He could hear it in the goalie's flinty voice, see it in his twisted expression as he lay flopping on the ice, the puck just out of his reach. Get out, never mind the puck. Harman was telling Rob himself to buzz off, out of the zone and right off the ice. This shift can't finish soon enough. Same with the game, Rob thought, just as a cold, wet, stiff swab of leather cuffed his jaw. He was locked up with his opposite number, on the edge of the crease, and getting worked over pretty good by another guy. The front of the goal mouth was frothing to a frenzy of arms, gloves, elbows, and sticks. Rob kicked the puck to the left corner. "Get out, lack!" Harman cried, hopping back up on his feet. Rob's defense mate, Gene Oliver, stocky and sure, his elbows and knees chugging, flung himself into the corner to fetch the little black loot. Ollie collided with a Waltham winger, and both went down hard, crashing into the boards. Rob felt a solid shove from behind. Minding the slot, he almost fell into it when Herman, skating strides from his crease, pushed him hard in the small of the back. "Get out, goddammit!" he shouted again at Rob as he backed up, then stopped with his skates planted at the front of his crease. The action continued in the corner. Ollie got up on one knee and beat a second Waltham forward to the puck. He flicked it out cross ice to the blue line just as he steadied back up on his skates. Immediately, Ollie was nailed with a check from behind that smeared him into the chicken wire fencing, stitched above the lip of the boards. At the right point, the Waltham defense was again at the ready. The puck was shot back in without hesitation, just like before. This time, though, it did not reach the cage. The shot plunked off Rob's right knee and dropped in an empty space between him and the boards. Rob was standing still, only a quick start away from getting his stick on the puck, when the next nearest beaver reeled into view. It was Herman. He left his cage empty to flag it down himself. "Lack, get the net! Get the net, Lack!" he squawked into Rob's right ear as he skated past him. The crowd tittered nervously, with the hometown portion baying at Herman's show of bravado. Harman's hot breath stayed in Rob's ear as he scoped a rear view of him winding up his stick for a chop to fell a redwood. "Get it out!" Rob now shouted at Herman, as he backed into the crease and took up the absent goalie's position. Rob felt the crossbar hit his back, and he stopped, just as Herman, thank God, he thought, followed through with the woodsman's blow and fired the puck on its way out of danger. It shot off the wide blade of Herman's goalie stick, sounding like a firecracker exploding in a tin can. The puck mimicked the crack of a splitting shingle when it hit high off the uneven patchwork of the badly built boards. But the puck, for a third time, did not leave the zone. Instead of making a logical carom out into center ice, it careened right back off the boards at Herman. Fluttering over his head, the puck dropped behind him. It was skidding straight for Rob, but it was out of his reach. The nearest Waltham player was 3 strides from the puck, a puck for a flicker of time still up for grabs. Rob's first instinct was to intercept it like it was an errant pass, just as he had done hundreds of times before. He did not do this. In a defensive spasm, he performed a move that he instantly felt himself regret once he found that he was sliding flat on his back. Making like a goalie, he sprawled across the top of the crease, clapping his left ear onto the cold surface, his 4 limbs up in the air. Waltham's pouncing forward still had his stick an inch from the puck when it vanished. He stopped with a spray and hopped to his right to avoid Rob sliding on his skates. Rob hugged the ice like he wanted to burrow into it, defending the goal line, he thought, with every inch of body he had. Buried beneath the ice is where he wanted to be when the Rovers forward. Then every one of his teammates raised their sticks in celebration and opened their mouths to shout. A flash, the camera's igniting bulb put many a puck mirage into the air, and they spread out before Rob's black spot-assaulted eyes. The real thing was nowhere in sight. All converged around him, teeth bared and gleaming, like jubilant lions ravaging the carcass of victory. Off of their bench they poured, more lions joining the fast feast. Still on the ice, Rob looked back over his shoulder. The goal light was still shining red like an open sore. He rose up on his elbows and lowered his eyes to the back of the net. There it was, disappointment purified into black rubber. The puck had slid beneath him. It mocked him, resting contented at home, his home, uninvited in the corner of his cage. The last words spoken at Rob by Herman in any direct, pointed manner right up until his own son made Bantam A 30 years later were painted across his ears as if they were a coat of forever-lasting lacquer, applied hard, stingingly, with a coarse horsehair brush. Herman's sentence was all the more raw because no one else, not even the coach, spoke. Silence draped the air in the time that it took for all the Riverview boys to undress and get out of the locker room following their devastating 3-2 loss in the state final of 1941. None of them knew, but it was to be the last organized hockey of their lives for most of them, and the last peacetime battle for many of them, prior to the full conflagration of World War II. 7 players aside never returned from service overseas. Rob was one step out of the locker room, one of the first to leave, having received to his great relief a sympathetic pat from his coach. Just then, Herman, still crouched along the locker room bench, called up to him in a level voice, "Robbie, you'll never live that down, boy, because I'll never forget this for as long as you live." Rob was able to let the moment go after too many years. He had tried to stop the puck. He was covering for his goalie, who never should have left his net in the first place, after all, he told himself, over and over. But it haunted him, that terrible feeling of having been, all by himself, the failed last line of defense, letting the puck somehow slip beneath him, then cross into his net, when it mattered more than anything would matter in quite the same way again. 3 years later, still marked by the moment Rob drifted back to the cold crease, and shivered all the while he and his fellow soldiers held out against a mortar barrage dug into black earth on an island in the Pacific. Face down, soft, wet dirt filled his nostrils as Rob pressed as hard as he could into the bottom of a 4-foot trench. Had a shell ended his life at that moment, his last thought would have been one of grief for letting a goal get by him in a high school hockey game. Maybe, scared to a chalk complexion under the mask of black soil clinging to his tightened face, it was just that Rob simply wished with all his might that he was back fighting non-lethal battles in the safe haven of Rink. Time and age eventually wound a thick gauze around the moment he never would forget, making it something he could live with and think of hardly at all. But he never did shake the goalie himself. Never quite completely had he shut Herman Harman out of his always expanding past. Indeed, Harman's horror was his own. Charles broke the spell of the Fossil Sports page. "See?" he said. "I guess Harman's been really horrible for a real long time now. Huh, Jerry?" Charles was nodding his head over Jerry's, and Jerry could see his face tilting up and down in the reflection of the microfilm screen, right over the grainy, almost supernatural picture, Jerry thought, of his dad, no more than a few years older than him at the time. "Had to show you," Charles went on. "Haven't told anyone else. Not Tommy, not Walsh, Jack, nobody. Isn't that your dad playing goalie?" Jerry's gaze had glanced off the headline and pictures, including another smaller 2-column shot of Harman's head with the wildly rebounding puck frozen like a UFO only inches over his slicked back hair. Jerry was reading the caption under his father's anguished though reclining pose. "Back on their heels," it announced, followed by Riverview defenseman Robert Lack, spelled incorrectly, tumbles to the ice to stop the puck shot off the boards and into the net by teammate, senior goalie Herman Harman. Too bad for the home team. This was the deciding goal of a 3-2 overtime state championship game loss. "Yeah, my dad," Jerry answered, after taking a deep breath and exhaling out more air than he had taken in. Jerry read on. "If that don't beat all, and that is just what Riverview goalie Herman Harman's own goal did. Beat them all the odds, and all of his teammates, too, when the wandering netminder pegged the puck off the boards and smack into his own cage, in overtime, in front of a full house at Riverview Ice Palace. Arriving in the unmanned Beaver's net off the blade of his own paddle-like goalie stick, Harman's errant clearing pass turned own goal tally, just 3 minutes and 19 seconds into the second overtime period, gave visiting Waltham a 3-2 victory in the deciding final game of the state championship high school hockey tournament in Riverview on February 27th. "There are bad bounces, and there are bad bounces," Riverview coach Stu Hawthorne said. "But the way that puck that's something I didn't think I'd ever see." Jerry nearly forgot that he was reading of an event that had been decades long buried, because now it was as alive as his own quickening breath. His eyes skipped down to read a quote from Harman himself. "I was only trying to clear it," the Beavers' shocked goalie said as he left the ice. "It must have hit a dink in the boards." Rob was not mentioned in the story itself, which drove home with the force of a dump truck running over a bottle cap the main fact that Harman had left his cage in overtime, then whacked the puck off the boards and back into his own net, to lose the championship game for the home team. The reporter described the devious, unexpected bounce off the boards by saying the puck acted as if it was spellbound. Further down the page, it said that a teammate struggled to halt the puck with a mind of its own, only to no avail. Such was the surprise sprung upon everyone in the building at that critical moment of hockey horror for the locals. As they left the rink, some Beavers fans were overheard to even call this self-inflicted defeat a suicide on ice, never to be forgotten. But it was forgotten by most everyone in Riverview, so it seemed. Jerry never had an inkling of the humiliating events. Never heard a single word, not from older hockey players, not from Harman, and not from his dad. It reminded him of a book, 1984, which he had read for English class in junior high, a hockey history omitted. Although not quite. The microfilm was not telling any lies. That memory hole hadn't been stopped up. Jerry pulled his face from the screen and looked up at Charles. "How'd you find it? How did you know to even look?" "I didn't know," Charles answered brightly. "I was doing a history assignment about the war, World War II, about Lend-Lease, equipment and army stuff sent over to England to help them out before we got into it, too. Lots of Lend-Lease stuff came from Riverview. They loaded up ammo and guns from factories they had right around here in town and sent it on trains up to Boston, packed it onto ships and sent it over. Lots of it didn't make it. U-boats." And Charles erupted a sound from the back of his throat, puffing out his lips for an explosion. "One place they made machine guns was right next to the rink, you know?" Charles looked back at the screen. "But then I found this when I checked out the sports pages, after I got bored of taking notes about Lend-Lease. Pretty nutty, isn't it? Why didn't we ever know about it, though, Jerry? That's what gets me." Jerry thought of how odd that was, how strange it truly seemed to him. Curious was the word that lodged in his mind. Then he said, "Well, I know one guy that sure as hell knows. One guy other than Harman. My dad." And Jerry looked grim and confused in equal doses. "He sure never told me. You think Harman, holds a grudge? To this day? That was 30 years ago," said Charles, choked by the words. "And now, when you think about how he gives it to Sonny for shooting pucks off the boards?" He looked hard at the ceiling, and then back down at Jerry. "Well, what should we do?" "Do?" Jerry said, getting up from the chair and pulling a handful of coins from his back pocket. "First thing I'm going to do is get a copy of this. Where's the money go in? How do you make one?" He fiddled with the lever and device that, upon the placement of a quarter, would make a newspaper-sized photocopy of the page lined up on the screen. When the machine spat out the copy on paper so thick, soft, and white, and shimmering that it seemed as wet as a newborn pup, Jerry held it in his hands and looked at it hard. He was more captivated by the immediacy this pulpy relic was hypnotizing him with than when he'd first seen it on the screen. "What are you going to do with it?" Charles asked Jerry as he made the folded-over copy of yesterday's news disappear into the center pages of his own third-period history text, then hesitated before leaving the library. "Going to tell your dad?" "Don't think I need to do that," Jerry said impatiently, shaking his head like his jaw was a sharp saw finishing off a 2x4. "He knows. How could he ever forget?" Jerry gave Charles a searching look and whispered, "Thanks," as he turned to walk down the center of the empty hall. He was already late for his first class on his first day back at school. But first he'd be stopping in to see his English teacher, Mrs. Privet. Maybe she'd have his corrected Shakespeare assignment, the one set right by Nell. Nell. It was the first time he had thought of her since slumping down in front of the microfilm machine. Only minutes ago. But minutes were a very long time to be without her in his head, since she first knocked on his door, with books in her arms and no smile upon her lips, only a tutor's task ahead of her. She had occupied his thoughts constantly, his every thought, day after day, ever since. Only now, Jerry's mind glanced off the image of Nell. She faded out of sight. A tossed, smooth, flat stone skipping out over the surface of a dead calm sea. His inner attentions returned to Harman's horror. to his dad, flat on his back. The past was busting out into his own living world like some mutant newsprint-tattooed chick hatching from a gray-shattered shell. For as long as he lived, he would not forget Nell. Although, since the days following his queasy headline revelation in the back room of the high school library, Jerry thought of her less and less. Splinter, a story about hockey, a boy, and a bench. Chapter 36, A Calling.
Beneath the lamp sun, I got to be the one with you.
Before his visit with Mrs. Privet was over, it was worth the bother to have gone to Nell's dress rehearsal. Mrs. Privet had picked up his paper when going to the show herself on Sunday, and she'd given him an A. Jerry had decided he would tell his Uncle Bob. He knew that Uncle Bob should be consulted, urgently contacted. At the same time, he became convinced that he should not ever bring the subject up to his dad. Jerry fidgeted on the couch. That night, watching television and quieter than usual, causing Jill to ask him, "Anything the matter, my dear?" Jerry kept recalling bits of the Lost and Found newspaper article all through every Cops and Crooks show that spilled from the tube. He could not make out the show's plots. There was no room left in his brain to do so, not with what he had to figure out, for himself, of the new mystery twist his own life had revealed. Since leaving the library, he had been stricken with a raw, undefined terror. Did Harman's horror have something to do with him making the team? Jerry kept returning to the notion. Pouring himself a tumbler of milk after coming home, Jerry wondered more intently if Harman did hold any sort of grudge against his dad. But if he had, then why hadn't he just cut him from the team without a second look, just like last season? And if he did have a grudge against his dad, then why hadn't his dad let him in on the little secret? Did Dad think it was his fault for all these years? Such questions resulted in a retranslation of the word urgency for Jerry. His immediate urge to phone his uncle was pulled and stretched out of all recognition of meaning something that needed doing right away. He sat on the revelation. The first place he did so was on the couch that Monday night. This after Rob, lying on the floor in front of the television, rolled on his back and turned his head to face Jerry, a curious look in his eyes. "You didn't say much at dinner, Jerry," he said. "So, what was it like being back at school today?" Rob chuckled lightly. "Learn anything?" Jerry could not see Rob without overlaying his father with the newspaper image of him lying in front of the cage. It started when they sat down to dinner, where the talk was of nothing but Jerry's first day back at school. Cheery chit-chat, but peppered with what was uppermost in both his parents' minds. Jill shot off short queries about whether he had any woozy spells, or tummy upsets, or problems during the day. Jerry answered patently, "No, nothing wrong, Mom," to all reminders of his condition, which were mostly reminders not of the injury and recovery he was doing extremely well with, but of the, according to the doctor, unrelated relapse in the vacant school the Friday before. All the while, Jerry was thinking only of Harman's, and now his own, horror. When Rob aided Jerry's imposition of the newspaper images template over his body, eerily moving into the exact same pose on the living room floor that he showed the newspaper cameraman on that winter night in 1941, Jerry was propelled from the room. "School's all right, good night." He huffed back at his father and went to bed. He would call his uncle, but it was not until Sunday that he did so. He made up his mind once and for certain as he punched his pillow up into a fluff on Saturday night. A feather was expelled from its end. Jerry inhaled it. the snowflake-sized floating object lodged in an entrance to a nostril, and he sneezed. He would miss church. It was up to him whether he went. "That's when I'll do it," Jerry concluded, his eyes closed. Gliding off to sleep, he thought of how he'd called Charles after dinner, and how Charles had asked him if he'd done anything yet. Charles did not dwell on the matter. The brunt of the call was to tell Jerry in a lather of how the team was ripping through the state tournament, how they'd won that afternoon, and were only a semifinals win next Friday away from an inevitable clash with the Cheltenham All-Stars for the state title. The final would be at Rink on the following Sunday night, just a week away. What about Eastchester? Eastchester? Who's Eastchester? Charles had said. They lost to Old Town Otters in the first round. Good thing, too. The ban on us playing them wasn't for the tournament. That would have been interesting. They've stunk, though, ever since. Not the same team at all. Since, said Jerry. Oh, and, today, Sonny kept bugging this one guy. All game, you know. Pushing him into the boards from behind, whacking his skates in front of the net. He was a defenseman, a big defenseman. But I wish you could have seen Sonny's face when the guy finally got bugged enough to drop his gloves and the refs just let him go. I mean, let him, the other guy, go, because Sonny didn't want to be going anyplace. Walsh still had his shucked glove riding up in front of his face. It was balancing unnaturally on top of his outstretched arm, which was lucky for Walsh, for the glove absorbed a haymaker aimed for the center of his face. The blow shook his balance, but he stayed up as the glove fell to the ice. Walsh gripped the defenseman's jersey, digging in with his fingers right to his bending nails. Trussed punches, left and right, scraped either side of his helmet. Walsh had failed to tie up his foe, but had, so far, managed to keep him fighting for his own balance. This only encouraged Sonny to carry on, and not drop to the ice, disappearing into his shell of his own arms over his head balled up like a reeling tortoise. A tactic he'd adopted before. "I pick my own spots," he'd said the last time it had happened. "You're just lucky you're not picking up your teeth," Jack had told him. Walsh did no more than only think about letting go of the safety blanket of the other guy's jersey, and began to furiously push energy down into his skates. He hauled the pair of them around and around. They resembled a horseless carousel of two, the boys both their own riders and mount. His opponent was the first to get dizzy before the officials stepped in, so Walsh felt like he'd won the fight. "You know it, fellas. The bigger they come," he shouted over to his bench. Frustrated and bored, Sonny's opponent shook his head. A speck of blood between his eyes, Sonny looked like he'd been shot. The dot put there when his opponent had mashed his own glove into his face. "Got another hole in your head, Sonny?" Martin told him, passing by the penalty box before the next face-off. "Play the game, man. This ain't no wrestling match." "Sonny thinks he's the Turk," Jerry said into the telephone receiver. "More like the jerk," Cannonball said back. "But never mind him. Cheltenham's the thing, and they'll have to come down here to us for the final. You should come, Jerry. Have your dad and mom take you. All the guys want you to be there." At the same time that he was saying this, Charles also felt a pang of guilt that was not his own, something that still hovered with his thoughts whenever he talked to Jerry about the team. Jerry did not mind, and loved to hear about what was happening, how well the Voyagers were doing. One thing he never felt about his teammates was jealousy. Envy dried up and scattered off to parts invisible in the bracing winds of Jerry's joy at being included in name with the guys. "You say anything to any of the guys? You say anything to Coach Harman?" Jerry teased nervously, his thoughts shifting to their shared knowledge of what lurked in the school library's microfilm chamber. "Course not," he said. "That's for you to know and for everybody else to find out." "So, you didn't show your dad the printout?" Jerry didn't know how to explain it to his best friend. No, he had not shown his father. Maybe Charles would have simply gone to his father, if he was Jerry, and said, "What happened here, Dad? What was that all about?" Jerry could not. He wanted to, but he couldn't. For him, 1 week after contaminating his consciousness with the chalky gleam of the microfilm screen, his dad and Harman were linked in more ways than just their shared appearance on the undead page. Jerry did not blame his father, did not equate him with his once coach's heart-tattering azure stare. His dad, if he indeed carried the event around with him at all, was hardly the goat of the piece anyway. He had gotten beat, but what an upstanding way to go down, trying with all his will strewn out there on the ice to save the game. It wasn't he who had done such a foolish thing as to take himself out of the net. Yet, what Jerry was left with was a feeling that Harman and his dad were equally damned in the eyes of fate. Damned for all time in the chambers of their minds, within the crusty walls of Rink, for having linked arms to throttle a so much happier might have been, in a moment that now reached out to grab at Jerry's own life. "Bob! Uncle Bob!" Jerry called into the phone the next morning. His parents had left for church. "Hey, kiddo, what has you giving your old uncle a bell on a Sunday morning? Here's something new. But I like it. Your dad need to talk to me? Where is he?" Bob was genuinely happy to hear his nephew's voice. He chugged black coffee, put down the empty cup. "Not Dad, Uncle Bob, no. I need to talk to you," Jerry continued, haltingly. He coughed. "You sick again, Jerry?" "Oh, no, not that," he said back, his voice hoarse. Bob spoke in a lower register. "You ready for your next instructions, then? Folks out of the house? That's why you're calling. So early? I know. I was wondering what was up. How things were going. Would have called you this week, if you didn't call me. I know your team is about near the end of the line. Almost time. The ponds must all be done freezing by now, too. Temperature shot up over 50 way up here this week. Funny weather in March. Managed to get on the ice much since we last spoke? Are you ready?" "Well, no, Uncle Bob, I haven't really. I mean, I did after I talked to you the first time. I skated a couple of times, more than a couple. Think I was able to find my way back on the ice, find my feet. I mean, it wasn't too bad, but—" "That's great. Proud of you. Knew you could do it, Jerry. So, our plan is still on the burner?" "Well, I think so, but—" "You think so? What is it, Jerry? Don't you think you're ready? Need another skate or two at the rink?" Jerry felt like he was looking at a sand castle, the tide eating it away as Bob spoke. Was Uncle Bob really just nuts after all? It had made him feel alive to think he might, some way, find himself back with the team. After what he had been shown in the library, he was not so sure. "Uncle Bob, it's not that. I'm okay with my skating. I was out there quite a lot, really. Followed your advice on getting ready out on the pond. I did it. It was pretty fun, too. Just doing that." "And nobody found out," Bob said warily. "Oh, no, nobody knows," Jerry said. "Then what's wrong?" Jerry blurted it out in a flood. It's the coach, Uncle Bob. I don't want to go back on his team again anyway, I decided. And they've only got another game left, or two probably, going to the finals next weekend. But thanks a lot, really. Thanks a lot for trying to make me feel better about everything. I feel fine, skating too, after my feet stopped hurting the first time or so. Even that was okay. It was great. It was really great." Bob was silent, and Jerry was thinking hard enough to fill in both sides of the conversation. He kept talking. "You don't need to worry about me getting back on the team, Uncle Bob. That's all right now. My dad said he'd take me to their championship game next week, if they make it, and they will. Don't know if I will, though. Doesn't matter if I'm there." "Jerry, what happened?" Nothing happened, he said quietly, like he was not about to say another word. The pressure of Jerry's silence squeezed the thoughts from his own head. "I just needed to say something to you, something I found at the school. Something I found at school." Jerry stumbled over the words as if he were walking blindfolded over train tracks. Bob purred. "Found out at school, huh? What, the birds and the bees again? Something happened last Valentine's Day?" No, not that. It's Dad and Coach Harman. When they were both on the Riverview High hockey team together, long time ago, way back. Charles showed me an old newspaper and... You mean Harman's Horror, Bob said like he was naming the title of a charade in one guess with less than one finished clue. Jerry stopped short and nodded at the floor. Is that it, Jerry? Bob asked. When Herman Harman shot the puck into his own net in the state championship game? I was not even born at the time. I came along a little later. But I know something of the story. And your dad was left holding the bag, strung out by the net, where that goalie should have been trying to stop the puck. Surprised you never knew about it. Don't imagine anyone in town remembers it, though. Maybe a few of your dad's contemporaries. Those that had not made sure to forget it on the spot. Jerry felt peculiarly the way he did when thinking he had failed a test. He found out rather that he had passed. Bob continued. That old newspaper you saw wasn't an old paper, Uncle Bob. It was on microfilm, like a TV screen, but with a picture on the page standing still. Jerry corrected him. Yes, I understand. More than you know. Because if it had been an actual old newspaper from 41, then you would have been one very fortunate young historian to have seen it. As far as I recall the story, if you saw an actual paper from that day, with that bit, that headline, Harman's Horror, then you would have been doing something like digging up a dinosaur's bones. Story goes that Harman's old man, really loaded, set in those days, he had an iron or two in the fire of the holding company that owned the paper, the Echo. The Echo back then, too, wasn't it? Right? Yeah, Jerry said wanly, feeling his way down the unmarked trail of his uncle's recall. It's the Riverview Fairchester Echo now. Yeah. Anyways, never mind the update. Listen to this, Bob said, and he lit into it. Herman Harman's old man was down to the editor's office that night as they were going to press, right after the game, and he demanded to see the sports pages before they went out. He saw Harman's Horror all put together with little black pieces of dirty type. Just that headline was enough for him. He told the editor to change it, right then and there. No kidding. The big or else, And he had the Echo's publisher, the big boss, on the line, right in the same room, standing there on the phone, in the middle of it all, right where they print the newspapers. He didn't change it. I mean, he couldn't have. I saw it. No. He didn't do anything of the kind. The paper went out just as you saw it, right on time. But Harman, the old man, made a few calls, and lo and behold, the next morning at daybreak, nobody got the paper. Not one newsstand, not one household. That's the way the story goes. But it doesn't seem the story's been making the rounds much these days. Bob started to laugh, real low, and it seemed like he was walking away from the phone. The next moment he was back, stronger in voice than before. I know I first heard about it back when I was in high school, Bob said. And Robbie? I didn't hear it from him. He'd never want to talk about it after I did know. So we never did. Well, what happened to all the papers? Jerry asked restlessly. The old man had 'em all scooped up. By hoods mostly. Gangsters, local creeps, penny ante bad guys, and old has-been bootleggers, turned out from the bars for the night. The guy had the bucks, knew people with dirty hands, and he could get things done. And that was that. Herman shipped off to the Navy right afterwards, they say, but I think he finished school first and left later, in the summer, then off to the war. Like your dad, not very long after that. How do you know all this, Uncle Bob? And why didn't my dad say? Jerry felt like he was sitting on the edge of a shaking cliff. Your dad? I think he'd just like to forget it. I think Rob would have been just as happy if he could have forgotten Harman for good. But no such luck. Up he pops as your coach. So, nothing's ever quite dead and gone, no matter how much dirt you shovel over the top of it. You'll find that out. Jerry thought he was finding out right then and there, finding out firsthand all he ever needed to know about things going around and things then coming back around again. He'd heard that expression enough and seen the going around part plenty in his short years. The coming around part, that was new, and it packed a fistful of rocks for a punch. Not convinced, Jerry said. He still could have told me more. Well, you knew that Rob and Harman were kids together, on the Riverview team, just for a little while. And except for the details, the only real substantial one there was, now you know that too. And Jerry, really, does it make a difference? What if your dad had said before you went out for the team, Jerry, that Harman guy, he's no good. I won't have you playing for him. Then what? Would you have understood if your dad was the one to have cut you before you even tried out? Your last year, to not have been cut by a coach, but demoted by your own dad? Would you have been happy with that? It's too bad that you had to be the Splinter this season before you got hurt. I'm right with you on that. But someone is always the Splinter with him. People know that, no matter if Harman held a grudge against the kid's dad or not. Was he ever your coach? Me? Oh no. Don't know when he started coaching. But I never gave the guy another thought until your dad told me he was going to be your coach at tryouts. I just said, yeah? Oh, how about that then? And he just grunted back. Jerry grunted into the phone. Hey, now I hope this has nothing to do with you not wanting to go through with our plan. We're going to get you dressed and on the bench with the boys for that final game when it comes. Harman or no Harman, this doesn't change a thing. It did. I'm not sure, Uncle Bob, Jerry whined. And how am I supposed to do that anyway? What good would it do me or anybody? Bob wound the cord of the phone around his wrist, squeezing a tangle of wire with his fist. Jerry, listen. Your dad and old Harman, they both might remember what you discovered in the newspaper, and then again, neither of them may give it a second thought. His words pushed up from someplace deep, far enough down his chest to be speaking in all ways, right from his heart. But do you remember what you said to me not so many days ago? I know it was the same kid talking to me. I remember what that kid said. It was how he was going to get back on the ice, come hell or high water. I remember that. Do you? Jerry wanted to say, I don't know if I still do. But the words would not come out. His voice was becoming disconnected from his head. His heart had hold of it instead. Jerry found the excitement he felt when Bob had first lured his thoughts in the direction of making a final play with the team. That his final play meant only to ride the bench, as was his former torment, did not matter to him. He started to tap his feet to an imagined beat. Jerry? Bob prodded after seconds of only hearing Jerry's feet clattering over the line. Are you that same kid I called before? I remember, he said, now rapping his fingers on the kitchen table, too. I do. Bob spoke into Jerry's ear, and the words went straight down into the center of every element that made Jerry that same kid his uncle was talking about. Remember this, Bob said. All that makes the fire bright, it's killing it at the same time, burning it out, and the flame will always burn out. The flames, the heat, the fire are what burn out the fire itself. What you've got to do, Jerry, is to burn as bright as you can. Jerry felt his uncle was no longer on the phone, but was standing right next to him in the kitchen. Can you do that? Bob said. Jerry wasn't sure he could. He was not at all sure what Uncle Bob meant, but he felt himself smile. So he answered, Yes, I think I can. Good, Bob said back to him, talking to Jerry like he was the last person on earth. Do this for me, if you never do another thing I ask for you to do. You understand, Jerry? Do what? Alert, he wanted to do whatever it was going to be. You say the state championship game is set for next Sunday? A week from today, at Riverview? Yeah, Charles told me. I mean, if the guys win in semis on Friday, I think, then they'll be home to Cheltenham on Sunday. That's it. But what do you want for me to do? Jerry stopped tapping on the table, pushed his chair back, and stood up, like he was about to go bolting from the bench to the ice. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to that game. Have Rob take you there. Bring all of your equipment with you. Jerry was close to feeling weak at the knees, like when he blacked out in front of Nell. Only he didn't feel faint. It was something else this time. His knees quickly firmed up. He wasn't descending. Jerry was starting to fly. on a high-altitude climb of the mind that he was ready to make with Uncle Bob. What will we do? Jerry said, practically inhaling the mouthpiece. What about Harman? Are we going to tell Dad? You'll see, Bob said, the seriousness of his tone spiced with a lilt to his voice that Jerry was more familiar with from his first memories of Bob than now. One more thing, though. And make sure you don't forget it, along with all your equipment and your uniform stuffed into your bag. Bob waited before continuing. Not a pore on Jerry's skin crept a fraction of a millimeter, either open or shut. Jerry thought to say, You mean, don't forget to bring my sticks too? Bob said, Can you make a copy of that old sports page? I got one already. I'm hiding it up in my room. I don't want to show it to Dad. Probably not for the best, Bob replied. But do this. First thing on Monday, put that page in an envelope. You mail it up to me. Jerry said he would, said see you later, and hung up. Bob's parting words were, Trust me, Jerry, and trust your dad. Skating undercover on the pond did take some doing. It was something he never would have decided to do on his own. Jerry felt a shiver, still, when he thought of what he had done, grinding his teeth when it crossed his mind of how close he came to getting caught. Uncle Bob gave him that courage. Or was it just a dose of brainwashing from a bad brain that meant good? Jerry didn't know which. Whatever it was, Uncle Bob persuaded him to break the rules. Just maybe his uncle could also talk his dad and even coax Coach Harman into letting him dress for the big game too? Jerry found himself newly alight with the thought. It wasn't hope that was lifting him, though. Not the same kind of hope that followed him on his way from tryouts, to making the team, to the pond. The hope he had before he fell down flat in front of Nell. What Jerry was clinging to now was closer to a self-hypnotized suspension of disbelief, like when he would shield under a down comforter, with a draft knifing through the house on a raw autumn night, while lapping up a good frightener of a film, flinching at every monster's lurch, as if the threatening thing were real and with him in the room. Jerry knew Bob's call to arms was a fantasy as well, just like the TV monster, something that only made him react as if it were really there. What was real and what he could imagine wrestled themselves into one lone competitor and pinned itself to the mat. The journey down Uncle Bob's fevered trail was making him feel the anticipation of the thrill of the game once more, and that was half the thrill of the whole thing. So he was feeling something that was real enough. That hockey vibration had entered him. Neither hope nor reality had anything to do with it. Jerry would go to the rink, and he would think up some excuse to load the bag and sticks into the car with him. But still, he thought, what for? It all seemed like the empty promise of a bad magic show trick. Could he do this for his uncle? Show up with his stuff? He didn't know why, but Jerry knew that he would. This call is for a Mr. Harman. Mr. Herman? Just let me check my notes a sec. Would you? The voice was muffled and crackled a bit over the phone, which was no surprise, as Bob was speaking through a folded handkerchief draped over the telephone's mouthpiece. He had seen it done in the movies. He had done this before. Bob was sitting by his snapping fireplace, having just finished his dinner of fried fish and steamed spinach and beer. He settled down to make the call. "What's that?" Harman said. "Can't hear you very well. Bad line. This is Mr. Harman. Herman Harman. Yes. Who are you and what are you calling about? I'm busy preparing for a big hockey game. I coach hockey and we're playing the state title tomorrow night. So if you can make it quick, I'd appreciate it." It was Saturday night. The Voyagers had taken down all comers, as anticipated. Tommy Zloty scored 4 goals in the semifinals, a 7-4 win over Lewisboro, and he had 11 in the playoffs total to lead the team. His punching hand still hurt him every time he shot the puck. The boys would be hosting Cheltenham at 7 on Sunday for everything. "So what is it?" Harman demanded. "Well, what it is, Mr. Harman, yes, got my notes now. And Bob was further masking his voice, adopting a sort of dimwit routine, and doing it impressive justice. Not that Harman would have known his voice or him in the flesh. All fumbles and whine, Bob went on. So, Mr. Harman, this is Williams. Will Williams. Oh, and we've got the same names almost, don't we? My. My. Bob whinnied with laughter, capping the outburst with a snort. Our parents gave us the same names, like Herman Harman and Will Williams, you know? I mean, we don't have the same names, not you and I. You are Herman. I'm Will Williams of Sports Pictorial, New England. But we were blessed, or maybe it was cursed, I don't know, with same names, front and back. My ma, she just couldn't part with the Willie bit. Loved my dadaz so much. She had to name me with it again. I never knew him, though, my pa. He left home soon as I was born. And how did you get your same names, Mr. Herman Harman? They're not the same, said Harman, then pulling the phone from his ear. There was enough space around him to do what he began motioning to do, which was to swing the telephone by its cord, then hurl the whole thing out through the closed bay window. He barely restrained himself from doing so. Cut the comedy, would you please? He said, hauling the phone back in by the cord, as if dealing with a faulty yo-yo. Sports Pictorial, New England? What is that exactly? Oh, have not heard? I am surprised. You being a coach and all. Sports Pictorial. No? You say that doesn't ring any little bells? And they should be big bells, Mr. Herman. Very big bells at that. Of course I have heard of Sports Pictorial, the magazine. Just the New England part, I never heard of such a publication. Never seen it. Never heard it called that before. It was beginning to sink in that a big-time sports magazine, the biggest, was bothering to get in touch with him. Maybe. Harman had the bait in front of him, and he was only starting to look at it. His jaws did unlock, though, when it crossed his mind that this was quite possibly a reporter looking for the story on the Bantam State Final, for the magazine's Kids' Corner. He recalled how he'd seen a story about the then new state champion in the same section of the publication last March. And while he was not keen on his kids having their names in print in the local paper, having a story done about him was another matter. That's simply solved, simple, sir. Or I should say, it's simple, Mr. Harman. I'm the sub-associate assistant regional general managing editor. He drew a windy breath. Of the New England desk of Sports Pictorial. I'm based up here in Maine. Bangor? Said Harman. Oh, indeed. Bang who, Mr. Harman? And here it is so close to Sunday morning. Naughty fellow! You must be a scream in the locker room. Harman made no noise. Bangor? Bangor, I should say, Bob said, returning on a dime to a sober tone. But I'll be handling the story and driving down to see you tomorrow. And what do you want with me? We're doing a follow-up piece on your team. We did an original story, but it never made it into print, unfortunately, back in November. On that terrible incident with a boy on your team? He in a coma? A boy, let's see. Here it is. Jerry, Lack. Jerry Lach. Lache. Pronounced Lake. Is that the one? Harman coughed and sounded as if he was going to spit out his tongue. Bob held the phone away from his ear an inch and turned his head, then went on speaking. Well, we never ran that story, but now, from our sources, we understand the Lake boy is recovered and there's going to be a kind of a, happy ending to all of it. Is that right? That what you've got planned? He is going to be, not that you need to know, of course. You are his coach. That is, he is going to be back on the bench, in uniform, in the championship game, in a kind of a gesture. Is that it, a gesture? Not playing, but there for the sake of being there, with the team, and his coach? That what you've got planned? Which I must say, Mr. Herman, got right to me. Got me right here. I'm tapping my chest. Right here, Mr. Herman. I think it will get all the readers across the country. And Canada, too, you know. Right there, too. Mr. Harman, you there?" Bob thumped his chest with the phone several times, then returned it to his ear. "Mr. Herman?" "Who told you?" "What?" Harman said, rearing back on his hips and looking up into the glinting teardrop chandelier that hung over his head. "Jerry Lake is absolutely not going to be back on the team tomorrow. His injuries were serious enough, from what I understand, to keep him out of the game for a very long time. Very long. He never came back after that incident you mentioned. I think he will be lucky to ever get on the ice again. It was a tough break, but he's not any longer with the team." "Where did you get this from?" No? Well, that's what I have from my editor. And a private source. Pretty good story, too. We were planning to run this as a full-page feature, Mr. Harman, and in the international editions. We have affiliates. The whole world's going to know about this. And what a fine thing to do. For a coach to let the poor boy sit on the bench to be with the other boys for the big moment. A kind of tribute to a fallen compatriot, hockey style. We were going to call it a coach's class call, or a coach's kind call, or a kind coach's class call, or maybe a kind of a coach's... "Jerry Lake's father get in touch with you?" Harman yelped. The light from Bob's fireplace turned his face red, reflecting a hopping candy corn-shaped flame in both of his eyes. No one. Just my source and my editor told me," Bob replied. Source? Well, one of them's a liar." Harman fumed, stomping the bait that he had considered tasting for only an instant into a scaly chum. He sensed something boldly untrue in the reporter's voice alone. Could not stand the man at the other end of the line for this, whomever he may be. And sorely remembering his ride to the kennel, he was more wary to again believe a voice over the phone. Harman's impulse was to slam the receiver down, ending the unlikely chat with a crash of plastic. But he stayed on. "Or maybe you're the liar. Lack isn't going to be playing tomorrow? Don't know what the hell you're talking about." "Oh, no, not playing, Mr. Harman. Right," Bob said. "No, but still a very fine gesture to have him on the bench, with the team as you go." "Not on the bench. Nowhere. Now would you let me alone? I have things to do." "But this is peculiar," Bob said, his giddy tone easing down a gear, and sounding a degree more believable for doing so. "My senior editor in New York took the story because it was a real hometowner, a real normal kind of a human interest thing. The source said you and Mr. Robert Lake, the boy, Jerry's dad, that you and he, is this correct? That you both grew up in Riverview, right in your hometown there, real normal, and played on the Riverview High hockey team in the early 40s, both together? That you and he go back such a long way." "I don't know," Harman chirped with finality. "Can't remember back that far. And no, we do not have any room on the bench for anybody who isn't playing. You can go tell your source that. You have no story here, not the one you're looking for, whomever you are." Will Williams. I told you." Harman hung up and went to bed. Bob took the handkerchief from his phone and swept it across his wet brow, got up and hung the phone back on the wall. The floorboards belched under his boots. Bob, who living on his own did this more often than he realized, spoke out loud. "But you don't know what story I'm writing, do you, Mr. Harman?" he said to the crackling logs. Bob tossed on a chunk of white wood, sat back down, staring into the flames.